So, I think our class today will not be terribly structured. I've got a few things that I'd like to make sure get covered within this time, but otherwise, don't feel like you're leading us astray if you lead the conversation in a particular direction. My hope is to cover the image of God. I'll give a historical overview of how that phrase has been understood within church history, and then we'll look at what it means in Scripture. But if the conversation goes in some direction or another, that's fine. Any questions from last week, since you said you listened online?
Well, I'm just, one thing, are you doing a brand new lesson for others that aren't here, or we're sort of pausing, others will pick up next week, so you left off last week?
It'll be a brand new lesson, and I am recording it so that they can catch up if they want to.
Yeah.
But it's rather repetitive because when we go over gender next time, you'll miss it if you're not here, sorry.
I'll be listening online. I listened to last week's.
We'll be covering, we'll have to review in order to make sense of it. So it won't be the end of the world if people miss this one.
Well, because I did listen to last week, can you just review, like for Helen, your comment about anthropology and how it isn't like anthropology that you get in secular?
Sure. So traditionally within the church, anthropology has always been studied under the heading of theology. So is angelology, so is the study of creation. Strictly speaking, you would expect anthropology, being anthroidology, to be the study of man. But as a subset of theology, it's studying man according to the aspect of divine revelation. Same with angels. It would be very difficult to do a study of angels any other way, but what you could do is you could go about and gather stories of experiences people have had with angels from all religions and from all types of people, and do some kind of cross-examination where you try to figure out what angels must be like based on what they seem to be able to do. But biblical angelology would be the study of angels according to what has God said about them. Because we're studying God indirectly. We're studying what he has said. And as a part of that, we're studying man and studying what God has told us about man. That will help us to understand man, which will help make us wise. Calvin said, I think quite rightly, that wisdom consists in the knowledge of man, of the knowledge of ourselves, and the knowledge of God. And by those two things, you live your life. But strictly speaking, when we study anthropology in this kind of setting, we're studying what has God told us about man. And because God's right, we learn about man. But what we want to learn about is God. So, today covering, and now I said last week, there's three things that are generally covered when you cover biblical anthropology. One is the image of God, what it consists of, and often related to that is what was man like in the beginning before the fall. Two is what is man substantially? Do we have a body and a spirit? Do we have a body and a spirit and a soul? And if there's three distinctions or two distinctions, what belongs to each? And lastly, to what extent and in what way has man been affected by the fall? Has sin destroyed the image of God? Has it marred the image? Has it corrupted the image? Is the image unaffected? What is corrupted? Are we guilty for Adam's sin? Questions like that. So in this lesson, I hope that we'll cover what is the image of God? Starting with how has it been understood historically? I'm going to leave out Jewish history because I'm not terribly familiar with it. But it was extremely common, almost unanimous. The early church understood that the image of God related to his moral character and his spiritual nature, his capacity for holiness. There was very quickly I'm going to call it just an error that crept in. People assumed there was a difference between image and likeness. Let us make man in our image and after our likeness. And so very common, people would take image to refer to the appearance, the physical, and say, they could quote the Latin poets, I believe it's Ovid's Metamorphoses, where they say that the beasts are bent down towards the ground, but man's eyes are lifted up to heaven, and it tells you something about them. And there's some truth to that, certainly, but they tie it too closely to the physical. Man stands tall and proud, where the beasts are on all fours. They'll say that reflects God's character. That's all true, but they distinguish and say that's the image, and then the likeness is the spiritual side of it. That was continued throughout the entire medieval period by the scholastic theologians, and then they would go on to elaborate those distinctions and make much of them theologically. Around the time of the Reformation, everybody began to see it's quite obvious in Hebrew. Image and likeness are two ways of saying the same thing. Hebrew is full of repetition. It's very often that you say, like, to the glory and praise of God. You wouldn't distinguish what's glory and what's praise and make them two totally separate things. Glory and praise. The coming and power of the kingdom. Yeah, it means the powerful coming of the kingdom. So the glory and image, or the image and likeness, it's just a way of getting at the same idea. We're the image of God because we're the likeness of God. So that's something the church has argued about in the past, but today I would say 99% of anybody you read is going to agree that they're the same thing, image and likeness. But they still disagree about what exactly does it mean that we're in the image of God. Questions so far? I'm going to cover the two big areas of disagreement before we get into looking at the text.
What is anthropology?
The study of man.
Okay.
Yeah, anthropos means man, ology means study of.
All right. Thank you.
Although in our case, we're studying really what has God said about man. Because you could learn lots about man that's not in the Bible. And it would be helpful, that we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. It's a good lesson. Doesn't quite say it in the Bible, though. And if you go to university, you can study linguistic anthropology, cultural anthropology, social anthropology, all kinds of ways they have of understanding people and our minds and our psyche that can be helpful, but they're not what we're talking about. We're just looking at what has God told us. Anything else so far? I realize I'm moving quickly. I see some of you writing and become aware. I talk faster when I see people taking notes. Drives the Miller students crazy. One of the major debates regarding the image of God between Catholics and Protestants has been the nature of original righteousness. They're agreed that being made in the image of God would imply that we were made righteous. And this comes from reading the New Testament. For example, Colossians, let's turn to some of these. No matter what I say, if we have some scripture in here, it's a good time, right? Let's look at Colossians 3:10. In verse 9 it says, "You have put off the old self with its practices, and have put on the new self, which is being renewed after the image of its creator." So talking about image of God. Here it's clear that by putting on the image of the creator, you're putting off lies. You're putting on honesty. There's a moral character that goes along with it. You see the same in, let's turn a couple pages back to Ephesians chapter 4. It says nearly the same thing, that we put on the new self created after, this is 4:24 in Ephesians, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. There you see image and likeness are used the same way. And in both cases, they relate to righteousness and holiness. They relate to God's moral character in which we're like him. So both sides are agreed that the image has to do with righteousness. That if you're like God, you would be righteous. They disagreed on whether or not that righteousness is intrinsic or extrinsic, meaning, did God make man and man was righteous in and of himself? Or did God make man morally neutral with the capacity for good and evil, and then he was there to help him make the right choices and see whether he'd become good or evil? I'm not really going to get into that today because I'm not quite sure how it works out, but I just want you to be aware that's part of the debate. Today, the debate has, since the more recent theologians, Barth especially, some have argued that the image is primarily relational, meaning it's not about who you are and what makes you up as a person, but it has to do with the relationships you have. That you're in the image of God because of how you interact. And some have said it's functional, that it's the things you do. You're in the image of God because you do things that are like God. You create, you build, you name things, you have dominion. Most commonly, those are two new things that have entered into the debate, but historically it's always been understood, no matter what you were debating, that the image of God has to do with the nature of man. That we are, in some sense, set apart from all of creation by being made in his image, because nothing else is said to be made in his image. None of the animals. I would suggest the angels are not said to be made in the image of God. I'll say about the modern debates that bringing in function and relation, if you believe it's substantive, meaning if you believe it's about how we actually are, that will have implications relationally and functionally. Whatever you say about the nature of man, it's like, is Jesus the Lord relationally, functionally, or substantively? Is Jesus the Lord because in his relationships he exercises authority? Or is he the Lord because he exercises dominion and does things that a Lord would do, like judges the earth? Or is he the Lord because that's who he actually is? It's his nature. It's his power. If you go with the third answer, the other two follow. And if you go with either of the first two, you're narrowing the idea unnecessarily. So I'm going to be coming from the, I think, traditional perspective. I think that when it says he made man in his image, it's referring to what did he make? What is the nature of man? Questions so far? I wanted to briefly cover where the church has been on these things. I think that overall there is widespread agreement on 2 points. One, that man is substantively, I don't have a better word for that, unfortunately, other than ontologically, which is worse, for clarity's sake. Man in his being is distinct from all of creation because he is like God in a particular sense that nothing else is. There's been widespread agreement on that, and there's been widespread agreement that that is linked to holiness and righteousness in some way. Questions before we start to actually look at the biblical teaching on it?
So, in question, the question on him in the image, we remain in the image of God. You put 2 points there, and the last point was we are set apart from the animals. That's what you would.
That's yeah, we're set apart from the animals in that when you look at the creation account, Genesis 1, man is the only one of whom it said, let us make man in our image. He doesn't make the fish in his image. They have likeness to him. And throughout the Bible, God is willing to compare himself and be compared with animals. You know, he's like a roaring lion. And when he roars, does the lion roar if he doesn't have prey? So God doesn't give a prophecy and it doesn't come true. Well, God is willing to be likened to animals in some way because they share a likeness. They're alive. He's alive. You know, they some of them are noble, like the eagle. Well, he's noble, but in a special way, man alone is said to be like God. And so, when we're asking, what does it mean to be in the image of God? Really, what we're asking is, what is that particular sense in which man alone, apart from all else, is said to be like God? Does that make sense? How are we like God in a way that no one else is? Since that's what's implied. Often, what's brought into this is our rational nature, our intellect. And there's a lot, you could see why we do that. You know, birds make nests and we build houses. Foxes have holes. But have you ever seen a bird get out of bed one day and build an altar to Baal? Or paint a picture? There's a sense that the way in which we differ from animals is it's not a matter of degree, but of kind. That wouldn't, if a bird got up and painted a picture, it would not be evolution. It would be some kind of revolution. There would be a complete change in its nature. There's nothing in birds to develop to that degree. I think if it happened, the most ardent evolutionists would not imagine that this was evolution. They would think it was a monster because the whole idea is crazy. So you could see why, historically, the image has often been related to intellect. And I think that's right. I think it should be related to intellect, but I don't think it would be appropriate to define it as intellect. And I'll give you 2 reasons. I want to be careful here because I think this has been more closely related to intellect historically than I'm willing to link it. But 2 reasons. One, in the story, in Genesis 1 through 3, the serpent is specifically called a beast, and he was craftier than all the other beasts of the field. So if we're asking, how is man different than the beasts? Fundamentally, what is the reason God is trying to give us here? Not just how is man different, because you could look at man and beast and figure out that man is smart and beast is stupid. You could figure out that man is artistic and every bird nest looks the same. You can figure that out by looking, but what is the text actually saying? The serpent speaks and deceives the woman. If the difference is that man can talk and beasts can't, why in the story where we're taught, where man is introduced in theology, why are we given a story about a talking beast? And if you wanted to make it fundamentally about walking, like some have confined it to, we walk upright and look at the stars, and the beasts walk on all fours and look at the earth. We're noble, and our thoughts are heavenwards. Well, why is the serpent cursed to go on the ground? That implies it was walking upright before. It's written in such a way that the 2 things you would expect to be most prominent about our distinction are actually said of a beast. What do you think of that? Are you following what I'm saying? I think I get too relaxed when I'm sitting down. Next time I'll have to stand. I can hear it in my voice.
I never thought about it that way before.
Yeah, well, if that was meant to be the thing setting us apart from the beasts, it's odd that the one beast that actually does anything in the story talks and walks around.
Yeah.
It's also, when you look at what God does, because we're made in the image of God, you look at what God does in the story, and there's not an emphasis really on his intellect. Everything God says in the chapter is a command in Genesis 1. And then he names things. And when he creates man, he says, let us make man in our image and let him have dominion over the earth. I would suggest, and I'm not on good, I don't have a lot of historical backup here, meaning this isn't what the church has always said for all time. But it seems clear to me that the image is strongly linked or even identified with dominion. That if you're looking for what sets us apart from the beasts, it's that we are to have dominion over the beasts. And this is also what sets us apart from the angels. Hebrews 1 says, "For to which of the angels did God ever say, 'You are my son. Today I have begotten you'?" Son implies heir. Son implies dominion. Or to which of the angels did he ever say, "Sit at my right hand, until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet"? No, of the angels, he says, he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flaming fire. But of the Son, he says, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever." From the beginning, man was created to have dominion. And the angels, though they are apparently smarter than us, they are more powerful than us. God sent one angel to destroy the Assyrian army. They are not promised dominion in the kingdom to come. God did subject the kingdom to come to them, but to those who are the heirs of promise. And this makes sense with the word image as well. In ancient Near Eastern texts, the Bible included, but not exclusively, the word image is used of many gods for idols, and the idols are the carved images you read about all the time. They bear a likeness to the god that is worshipped in them, but they stand in as representatives. They function as rulers. But we're the image of God, and you're not supposed to make images of God. But we're the image of God, and we represent him and rule for him on earth. So I'm suggesting to you, though I'll give you a few more texts to prove it, actually. Let's look at Psalm 8. Methodologically, what I'm doing is slightly different than what you would get in most theology books. Most theology books will start with the New Testament texts. For example, Colossians 1:15 says he is the image of the invisible God. Romans 8 says we are conformed to the image of his Son. 1 Corinthians 15 says that we bore the image of the first man, the man of dust. We'll bear the image of the second man. They start with the New Testament and show that Jesus is the image of God, and Jesus is righteous and holy. We're being conformed to that image, away from being sinful. And they'll say, so the image fundamentally is about being righteous. I'm starting with the Old Testament, and I'm looking at what did image mean in the original context, and how does the Old Testament flesh that out? And I think it fleshes it out in a way. I didn't end up turning to Psalm 8, but you'll see it says, "What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man, that you care for him?" Verse 5, "You have made him," in two ways you could translate this, either a little lower or a little while lower than the heavenly beings, and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heaven, the fish of the sea, whatever passes along." You see that we're answering the question, what is man that you are mindful of him? And the Son of Man that you care for him. The answer given is dominion, authority. God's created the whole universe, the stars, the moon. And when you look at it, you wonder, what is man? What makes man special that God has invested so much in them? And this is the answer given, dominion. I think that answer is consistent with Genesis 1, and is consistent with God's purpose revealed throughout his covenants, that he gives Abraham a covenant to have dominion. Your offspring will possess the gate of his enemies. Israel, you will be the head and not the tail if you obey. Jerusalem will be lifted up, and all the nations will flow to it, and the word shall go out, or the law shall go out from Zion. All of that's about dominion. I'll put your enemies under your feet. That's about dominion. But involved in dominion is righteousness. Because it's not just having dominion. It's having dominion under God. Because God is the one who commands him, subdue the earth, fill the earth and subdue it. And once you start disobeying God, you're no longer obeying the command. So, man's rule when he sins, I'm getting ahead of myself, we'll cover this at a more detail later, but man's rule when he sins is frustrated. He's supposed to rule the ground, well now it's going to bear thistles. He's supposed to fill the earth, well now there's going to be pain in childbearing. Filling the earth would be a way of subduing it, of course. If you fill something, you rule it. So that's why we read that God fills all in all. It means he rules everything. It's why it says, be filled with the Spirit. It means be ruled by the Spirit, not drunk with wine. Don't be ruled by that. That's why Pharaoh's afraid. When he sees that they're filling the land, he's worried that his rule is in danger if somebody else fills. So fill the earth, subdue it. God frustrates their rule. He makes it difficult, but he doesn't take it away. His purpose is unchanged. They're still intended to be his representatives. And if Israel obeys, they become rulers, and they become higher and higher and more exalted. Questions? I'm now just throwing information at you, but how are we doing?
Well, I picked up on the key there, that dominion under God.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say that is linked to all the things the church has always linked image to. It's linked to our capacity for art. It's linked to our capacity for reason. You rule by making decisions. Sin is crouching at the door, its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. How do you rule over it? Decisions. It's an act. You have to have an act of the will. Your mind is engaged, and you decide, I am not going to give in to this. When Joseph is appointed, he's the right hand of Pharaoh. He is making decisions left, right, center. He is deciding what would be wise. When Solomon's made king, God appears to him in a dream and says, what should I do for you? And he says, I don't know how to rule. Give me wisdom so that I might discern what is good and evil. So wisdom and knowledge are linked to rule. They're required for rule. But they don't necessitate rule. The angels are incredibly wise. They're incredibly smart. The devil is called cunning. And he knows, he's been scheming from the beginning, and he's often very successful. But that doesn't mean that it's his nature to rule, or his purpose to rule. He wasn't created to rule. He's called the God of this world, because he has all the capacity to rule, and he wants to do it, but he's a usurper. He's ruling wrongfully, whereas we would rule rightly, because we'd rule under God.
I'm sure it's not exclusive, but a lot of Western countries have used the word dominion.
Mm-hmm.
But they're countries that, at the time of talking about dominion, they're countries that are under God. You know, Canada being one of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's the word we don't use anymore. It used to be, before Canada Day was Dominion Day. Dominion from sea to sea. But it was the concept was there that it was a Christian country under God. God was prominent in the country at that time. Rightfully or however people ruled, properly or not, the concept was there, I think.
I don't think of it as a theological word. I mean, it's related to dominate, right? If you dominate something, you have dominion over it.
Yeah, but I think non-Western countries, if you call them like not Christian countries, I don't think you see the word used that much as for dominion as you do in like Commonwealth countries, for example. But
Yeah, I don't know. I never hear them use the Hebrew word, though. Memshelet.
no, I'm sure not. I'm just bringing up the word dominion because current generation wouldn't know that we used to be called the Dominion of Canada.
It's true. I wouldn't know that.
I
And
wouldn't
the Canada
know that
Day
either.
was, until in my lifetime, it used to be called Dominion Day.
Okay.
And it's changed.
Cool. I realize I've kind of gone around in circles because I forgot to outline the things I wanted to say. I just knew them. So to summarize, I believe that in the Bible, when it says, let us make man in our image, he essentially means, let us make man to rule in our stead. There's favor put on him. It's not so much that we're made and we're better rulers than everybody else, but he's made us to be rulers. And that takes in order for us to rule under him, we have to be able to have a relationship with him. We have to be able to talk to him. We have to be able to make decisions. So it takes in our reason, it takes in our artistic abilities, because we're ruling in a way that reflects him. He just showed his dominion by creating the universe and creating it good, making it beautiful. You know, if you make a city, you're exercising dominion over the earth. If you make a beautiful city, you're doing it in a way that is a little closer to the purpose, because we're reflecting God in this dominion, not just having dominion. When the Gentiles lord it over them, that's a corruption of the image, because we're supposed to have dominion over the earth. But you're not supposed to have dominion in such a way that it's all about you and your entitlement. Christ came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. That is reflecting the kind of dominion that we're created to have. So it's a dominion that is linked to righteousness. In order to represent God well on the earth, you have to be holy, you have to be righteous. And when man ceases to reflect God, when he becomes rebellious, his rule is frustrated. I'd suggest that many of the things that get talked about when you talk about the image are true, but not as essential to the image as they've been made out to be. It's true that we have reason, but that doesn't set us apart from the angels. It's true that we're artistic, but that doesn't necessarily set us apart either. What's emphasized is that the earth is subjected to us. And this is continued throughout the Bible, so that God chooses man and only man to rule the earth forever. God becomes man, and he gives Christ an eternal kingdom. He didn't become any other animal. He didn't become an angel. He became man to rule forever as man. Make sense? I didn't realize... never mind. I'm going to pause the recording there. Have a good life, everybody.